My parents boycotted my wedding to protect my older sister's feelings, claiming my happiness was a direct insult to her lack of a husband. Devastated, I uncovered the financial fraud fueling their perfect lifestyle, so I prepared an anniversary toast that would expose their crimes to everyone. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The morning of my wedding was supposed to be a flurry of champagne, hairspray, and nervous excitement. Instead, it was defined by a silence so loud it made my ears ring. I was sitting in the bridal suite of the hotel, staring at my reflection in the oversized vanity mirror. The lighting was perfect, soft, golden, designed to make a bride look glowing and ethereal. But I didn't look glowing. I looked gray. My stomach had been churning since 4 in the morning, a violent nausea that had nothing to do with pre-wedding jitters and everything to do with the notification blinking on my phone screen. My makeup artist, a sweet woman named Jen, was hovering nervously with a blending sponge. "Honey," she said softly, "if you cry again, we're going to have to start the foundation from scratch, and we're on a tight schedule." "I know," I whispered, my voice sounding like gravel. "I'm sorry, I'm trying." I looked down at the phone again, just to make sure I hadn't hallucinated it. The text message from my mother, Patricia, had come in at 3:45 a.m. It was long, rambling, and composed with the cold, clinical detachment of a corporate rejection letter, yet it was signed with a heart emoji. "Scarlett, your father and I have been up all night discussing this. We simply cannot attend today. We know this is your day, but you have to understand the bigger picture. Rosie is in a very fragile state. Seeing you walk down the aisle, getting everything she hasn't achieved yet would be too cruel a blow for her mental health. We are staying with her to support her. We hope you understand. Have a lovely ceremony. Love, Mom." I read it for the 50th time. Have a lovely ceremony. As if I were going to a brunch they couldn't make it to. Is it bad news?" Jen asked, her hand resting on my shoulder. I looked up at her, my eyes burning. "My parents aren't coming." Jen froze. "What, did they have an accident? Is everyone okay?" "No," I said, a bitter laugh bubbling up in my throat, tasting like bile. "They're fine. Physically, they are perfectly fine. They decided my sister's feelings were more important." I stood up, the silk of my robe slipping against my skin. I walked to the window, looking out at the venue grounds. The chairs were already set up. The florist was arranging the archway where I was supposed to say, "I do." There were 2 reserved seats in the front row, 2 seats that would now be gaping holes in the photographs, visible scars on the most important day of my life. My fiancé, David, had been furious when I showed him the text. He wanted to drive over to their house and drag them here, but I knew it wouldn't matter. If Patricia and Robert decided something, it was law. In their world, image was everything, but the internal narrative they constructed was even more powerful. In their story, they were the martyrs, the devoted parents saving their fragile, eldest daughter from the pain of her younger sister's success. I felt a wave of dizziness and gripped the windowsill. I had spent my entire life trying to be the easy one. The one who didn't ask for money, who didn't get into trouble, who built a career in crisis management specifically, because I was so used to managing the crises inside my own home. I had minimized my promotion to avoid upsetting Rosie. I had downplayed my engagement. I had even picked a venue that was less expensive than Rosie's first wedding, just to avoid the comparison. And it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I turned back to Jen, wiping a tear before it could breach my lower lash line. "Do the makeup," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm getting married." "You sure you're okay?" she asked, looking doubtful. I looked at the phone one last time, then flipped it face down on the vanity. The pain was there, a sharp, jagged thing in the center of my chest, but beneath it, something else was waking up. A cold realization that I was an orphan in every way that mattered, except for the inheritance. "I'm fine," I lied, but as I sat back down, I realized the text message wasn't just a cancellation. It was a declaration of war. They had chosen their side. They had chosen Rosie not just as a favorite, but as the only child who mattered. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis of terminal indifference. It was the realization that to them, my happiness was an act of aggression. The ceremony was a blur of motion and color, but the absence my parents was a physical weight in the air, heavy and suffocating. As I walked down the aisle, clutching my bouquet of white peonies so hard the stems snapped, I saw the guests whispering. It's impossible to hide the fact that the bride's parents are missing. David's family filled the left side of the aisle, a sea of smiling, supportive faces. On the right side, my friends and extended relatives sat, but the two chairs in the front row, the ones with the little "reserved for mother of the bride" and "reserved for father of the bride" signs, remained empty. I had asked the coordinator to remove the signs, but in the chaos, the message hadn't gotten through. So there they were, two wooden chairs staring at me like judgmental eyes. I focused entirely on David. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes filled with a fierce mixture of love and protective rage. When he took my hands at the altar, he squeezed them tight, anchoring me to the earth. "I've got you," he mouthed. And he did. We said our vows, we kissed, and for a moment the joy was real. But the reception was a minefield. Every time a well-meaning aunt or a confused cousin approached me, I had to recite the lie I had concocted in the limo. Mom and Dad came down with a terrible viral bug this morning. Food poisoning, maybe. They're devastated to miss it. I saw the skepticism in their eyes. People knew Patricia and Robert. They knew my parents were made of Teflon and vitamins. They never got sick when there was a social event to attend. Later that night, after the cake had been cut and the dancing had started, I retreated to the bridal suite to change into my reception dress. I needed a moment of silence. I sat on the edge of the bed and checked my phone. 0 missed calls from them, 0 texts asking how it went. I decided to call them. I don't know why. Maybe I was a masochist. Maybe I needed to hear their voices to believe they had actually done this. Robert answered on the second ring. The background noise was loud, clinking glasses, low chatter. It didn't sound like a house with a fragile daughter and 2 sick parents. It sounded like a dinner party. "Scarlett," his voice was clipped, annoyed. "We're in the middle of dinner." "Dinner?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I thought you were comforting Rosie. I thought she was fragile." "She is," my father said, his tone defensive. "We took her out to Le Jardin to get her mind off things, to celebrate her resilience." Le Jardin, the most expensive French restaurant in the city, the place where you went to be seen. They weren't hiding at home nursing Rosie's wounds. They were parading her around, likely spinning a story to anyone who asked about why they weren't at my wedding. "You're at a restaurant," I repeated, the absurdity washing over me. "On my wedding night. You skipped walking me down the aisle to eat escargot with Rosie." "Lower your voice," he snapped. "You're being hysterical. This is exactly why we couldn't be there. You always make everything about you. Rosie needed us. You have David, you don't need us." "I needed my father," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. "Stop with the guilt trip." Patricia's voice cut in. She must have been listening on speaker. "We sent a gift, a very generous check. It's in the mail. Don't be ungrateful, Scarlett. It's unbecoming." The line went dead. They hung up on me. I sat there, staring at the phone, the silence of the room rushing back in. A check. They thought a check could fix the fact that my father didn't dance with me, that my mother didn't help me into my dress. I stood up and walked to the mirror again. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I was a crisis management PR specialist. I fixed reputation disasters for a living. I spun narratives. I buried scandals. I knew exactly how public perception worked. My parents and Rosie relied on their image. Robert was the benevolent treasurer of the community trust. Patricia was the head of the social committee. Rosie was the successful, high-powered realtor. They were the perfect family. But I knew things. I knew Rosie hadn't sold a house in 6 months. I knew Robert had been moving money between accounts in ways that looked incredibly creative. I knew Patricia's, charity galas, had overhead costs that didn't make sense. I wiped my face, reapplied my lipstick, a darker shade this time, and looked at my reflection. They thought they could buy my silence with a check and erase my existence to protect Rosie's ego. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was the one person who knew where all the bodies were buried, and unlike them, I had the receipts to prove it. To understand why my parents would skip my wedding to eat dinner with my sister, you have to understand the mythology of Rosie. Rosie was the firstborn, and in Patricia and Robert's eyes, the mold was broken after her. She was blonde, statue, square, and excelled at everything that looked good on a Christmas card. Cheer captain, prom queen, sorority president. I, on the other hand, was the quiet brunette who read too much, had opinions that made dinner parties awkward, and chose a career that involved cleaning up messes rather than pretending they didn't exist. For 31 years, Rosie had been the sun, and the rest of us were just planets hoping to catch a bit of warmth. But the sun was burning out. Rosie's career as a realtor was a masterpiece of fiction. She had the flashy car, a leased Range Rover, and the designer wardrobe, but she lacked the work ethic. She would lose clients because she forgot appointments or insulted their budget. In any other family, she would have been told to get a real job. In our family, Robert just quietly paid her credit card bills, and Patricia told everyone Rosie was specializing in exclusive, off-market listings. I had spent my 20s playing the supporting role. When Rosie's first engagement fell apart because she cheated, I was the one told to keep quiet for the family reputation. When she crashed her car while driving under the influence, I was the one who called in a favor with a journalist friend to keep it out of the local paper. I did it because I wanted their love. I thought if I was useful enough, if I was successful enough, they would finally look at me the way they looked at her. But the wedding snub was the final proof. I would never be Rosie, and now I didn't want to be. I returned from my honeymoon to a house that felt different. David and I were happy, but the shadow of my family loomed over us. I hadn't spoken to them in 2 weeks. Then the invitation arrived. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold leaf lettering. Patricia and Robert invite you to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary. A charity gala evening at the country club. I stared at it. The audacity was breathtaking. They skip my wedding, then invite me to celebrate their marriage a month later. I was about to throw it in the trash when the doorbell rang. It was Patricia. I hadn't seen her since before the wedding. She stood on my porch, looking immaculate in a cashmere coat, holding a basket of muffins like nothing had happened. "Scarlett, darling," she beamed, breezing past me into the living room without waiting to be invited. "I haven't heard from you. I assume you're still sulking." "Sulking?" I closed the door, leaning against it. "You boycotted my wedding, Mom." She waved a hand dismissively, setting the muffins on my coffee table. "We did what was best for the family. Rosie was in a crisis. You're strong, Scarlett. You can handle things. Rosie needs support." She turned to face me, her smile tight and predatory. Patricia was a beautiful woman, but her beauty was like a polished stone, hard and unyielding. She wore her status like armor. "Anyway," she continued, "I came to make sure you're coming to the gala. It's a very important night. Robert is being honored for his work with the community trust. It's vital that we present a united front. People have been asking why we weren't at your wedding. We told them it was a small, private elopement." My jaw tightened. They lied. Of course they lied. "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "So you want me to come and play the happy daughter so your friends don't think you're monsters?" "Don't be dramatic," Patricia snapped. "We want you there because we love you, and Rosie will be there. She's bringing a new friend, a developer. It's very promising. We need you to be supportive. Don't mention your wedding. It might make the gentleman feel awkward that Rosie isn't married yet." She looked around my living room, her eyes landing on a stack of mail on the counter. "Oh, and Scarlett, we need to make sure the trust finances are perfectly opaque before the audit next month. I know you helped with the PR for the fund last year. You didn't keep any copies of the ledgers, did you? The question was casual, too casual. I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't here to apologize, she was here to check for leaks. No, Mom, I lied, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs. Why would I keep old files? She visibly relaxed, her shoulders dropping half an inch. Good, you know how messy these things can get. We just want everything to be perfect for the gala. She walked over and pecked me on the cheek. Her perfume smelled of expensive lilies and cold ambition. Wear something nice, Scarlett, but nothing white. Rosie is wearing cream. As she walked out the door, she paused. We really are proud of you, you know, in your own way. I locked the door behind her and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. In my own way. I walked back to the kitchen and stared at the invitation. Then, I went to my home office. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a hard drive. Last year, when I had done the PR cons, alting for the community trust, I had digitized everything for them. Robert wasn't good with computers. He had given me his passwords. He had given me access. I plugged the drive into my laptop. Patricia was right. Rosie's life was expensive, and Robert's salary as a treasurer was modest. So where was the money coming from for the Range Rover, the trips to Le Jardin, the designer clothes? I opened the folder labeled Trust Disbursements. It took me less than 10 minutes to find it. A series of transfers to a shell company called R&R Consulting. The address for R&R Consulting matched a PO box registered to Rosie. My heart broke, and then it calcified. They weren't just favoring her. They were stealing from a charity fund meant for underprivileged families to pay for Rosie's lifestyle, and they wanted me to come to a gala celebrating my father's honesty. I looked at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. Okay, Mom, I whispered to the empty room. I'll come to the gala, and I'll definitely say a few words. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in the room. It was 2:00 a.m., 3 days after Patricia's visit. David was asleep in the other room, having finally given up on begging me to come to bed. But I couldn't sleep. I was too busy dissecting the anatomy of a crime. As a crisis management specialist, I deal in facts. Emotions are messy variables that cloud judgment, but bank statements are beautifully, brutally honest. I had cross-referenced the community trust's ledger with the R&R Consulting invoices. It was clumsy work. Robert had gotten arrogant. He assumed no one would ever look closely because he was Robert, the pillar of the community, the man who shook hands with the mayor. The deeper I dug, the more nauseous I became. Invoice 402, Strategic Planning Consultation, $4,500. Date, June 12th. Cross-reference, Rosie's Instagram post from June 13th showing off a new limited edition Chanel handbag. Caption, treating myself because I work so hard. Boss babe. Invoice 409, Site Survey and Logistics $8,200. Date, August 4th. Cross-reference, Rosie's trip to Cabo San Lucas with her friends. It wasn't just a little skimming off the top. It was a hemorrhage. Over the last 3 years, they had funneled nearly $250,000 out of the trust. Money meant for the local youth center, the food bank, and the homeless shelter renovation project. I sat back, rubbing my temples. The betrayal I felt about the wedding was a sharp, personal dagger. But this was a sledgehammer. My parents weren't just bad parents, they were criminals. They were stealing from the most vulnerable people in our city to fund Rosie's delusion of grandeur. And they wanted me to come to a gala, celebrating their service. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. It was late, but I knew he would be awake. "This is Marcus," a gruff voice answered. "Marcus, it's Scarlett," I said. "I need a favor, a big one." Marcus was a forensic accountant I had worked with on a corporate embezzlement case years ago. He was the best in the business at finding where money went when people tried to hide it. "Scarlett, I haven't heard from you since the Peterson scandal. What's the job?" I have a stack of digital ledgers and a shell company. I know what they're doing, but I need it to be irrefutable. I need a visualization. Graphs, flow charts, a direct line from the donor, accounts to the personal expenditures. Can you do that? Easy, he said. Send me the files. Who's the target? I hesitated for a fraction of a second. My parents. There was a silence on the line. Then, Marcus's professional tone returned, colder and sharper. I'll have it ready in 48 hours. After I hung up, I turned my attention to the gala itself. If I was going to do this, I couldn't just walk in and shout accusations. They would call me crazy. They would say I was a jealous sister having a breakdown because they missed my wedding. They would spin it. I needed the room to see the truth with their own eyes. I opened my email and found the contact for the gala's event planner. Her name was Chloe, and she had been a junior associate at my firm before branching out into events. We were on good terms. Subject, a surprise for Mom and Dad. Hi, Chloe. I'm so excited about the gala on Saturday, since I missed giving a speech at my own wedding due to, well, you know, I really want to do something special for Mom and Dad's anniversary during the event. I've put together a video montage of their charitable achievements over the years. It's a surprise. Can I send you the file to load onto the main projector? I'd love to introduce it right before the main toast. Best, Scarlett. The reply came 10 minutes later. Scarlett, that sounds so sweet. They will love that. Send it over by Friday morning and I'll have the AV team queue it up. Can't wait to see you. I leaned back. Kay in my chair, my heart rate finally slowing. The trap was set. Marcus would build the bullet and I would pull the trigger. But first, I had to be sure. I had to look them in the eye one last time and give them a chance to confess. Not because I thought they would, but because I needed to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there was nothing left of my family worth saving. 3 days before the gala, my mother organized a family brunch at their estate. It was mandatory attendance. David refused to go. If I sit across from them, Scarlett, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to ask your father why he's driving a new Mercedes while the youth center roof is leaking. You can't, I said, adjusting my blazer. If you blow up now, they'll circle the wagons, they'll hide the evidence. I need them comfortable, I need them arrogant. So I went alone. The house was immaculate, a sprawling colonial with manicured hedges and a driveway that cost more than my college tuition. When I walked onto the patio, the scene was picture perfect. Patricia was pouring mimosas. Robert was reading the Wall Street Journal, and Rosie was there, clinging to the arm of a man I had never met. Scarlett, Patricia cried out, as if she hadn't interrogated me about ledgers a few days prior. You made it. Come, sit. I took a seat opposite Rosie. She looked expensive. Her hair was freshly blown out, her dress was silk, and on her wrist sat a Cartier bracelet that looked suspiciously brand new. Scarlett, this is Mark, Rosie said, beaming. He's a property developer. We're collaborating on some very high-end listings. Mark was handsome in a generic catalog model way. He had a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Nice to meet you. Rosie tells me you work in PR. That's cute. Crisis management, I corrected, unfolding my napkin. I clean up disasters. Right, Mark said, dismissing me instantly to turn back to Robert. So, Bob, about the zoning for that downtown project. I think with your pull at the trust, we could really expedite the permits. My ears pricked up. The trust? I asked, keeping my voice light. I thought the trust was strictly for charitable community development, not commercial real estate. The table went quiet. Robert lowered his newspaper. His eyes were cold behind his reading glasses. It is, Scarlett, Robert said, his voice a low rumble. Mark is proposing a mixed-use development, low-income housing. High-end condos with a percentage of affordable units, Mark corrected, winking at Rosie. Very profitable. I see, I said, taking a sip of the mimosa. It tasted sour. Speaking of the trust, Dad, I was looking over some of the old files I had. just to refresh my memory on the mission statement. I noticed a vendor name that kept popping up, R&R Consulting. Who are they? The reaction was immediate and electric. Patricia dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Rosie stiffened, her eyes darting to our mother. Robert didn't move, but his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. They are external auditors, Robert said, his lie smooth but delayed. They help with compliance. Funny, I said, locking eyes with him. Because their billing address is a P.O. box in the same zip code as Rosie's apartment, and they seem to bill for consulting in the exact amounts of luxury items. I looked pointedly at Rosie's bracelet, like jewelry. That is enough, Patricia hissed. Her face had lost its color. This is a family brunch. We are not discussing business. I'm just curious, I pressed, leaning forward. Because the audit is coming up, right? If the auditors find payments to a shell company linked to a family member, that's not just an error, Dad. That's 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Rosie slammed her hand on the table. You are so jealous. You can't stand that, Mark, and I are building something huge. You're just a bitter little girl because Mom and Dad didn't come to your cheap little wedding. Rosie, Robert warned, but she was on a roll. No, she's always been like this, Rosie spat, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. Always trying to ruin my moments. R&R is a legitimate business. I consult, I give Dad advice on market trends. You consult? I asked quietly. You charged the charity $4,000 for market trends the same week you bought that purse. You don't know what you're talking about, Rosie screamed. She looked at Mark for support, but Mark was looking at the family with a dawning expression of horror. He was a shark, and he smelled blood in the water. He was realizing this wasn't a power family, it was a liability. Scarlett, Robert said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Drop it. Now, you don't understand the complexities of finance. We move money to protect assets. It's standard practice. If you say a word of this to anyone, if you try to sabotage the gala, you will be cut out of the will, completely. I don't care about the will, I said. Then care about your reputation, Patricia added, her voice dripping with venom. Because if you slander us, I will make sure every client in this city knows you are a mentally unstable liar who attacks her own family. I looked at them, the three of them united in their corruption. Rosie, the spoiled parasite, Patricia, the enabler, Robert, the architect. They weren't afraid. They were offended that I dared to question them. They truly believed they were untouchable. Okay, I said, standing up. I'll drop it. Enjoy your brunch. I walked away, my heart pounding in my throat. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. They thought they had bullied me into submission. They thought the threat of disinheritance and slander would keep me quiet. They had confirmed everything. They admitted it was Rosie. They admitted the fraud. And they showed absolutely zero remorse. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, shaking. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Chloe. The video file is ready. Sending it now. The next 48 hours were a blur of cold calculation. Marcus came through. The dossier he sent me was a work of art. It wasn't just spreadsheets, it was a narrative. He had tracked the flow of money from the community trust donations, money given by local businesses, elderly widows, and school fundraisers, directly into the accounts of R&R Consulting, and from there, directly to credit card payments for Rosie's debts. He found the lease payments for the Range Rover. He found the tuition for a life coaching course Rosie dropped out of. He found the payment for the LeJardin dinner on the night of my wedding. That one hurt the most. Invoice 512, client entertainment, $850. They had charged the charity for the dinner they ate while skipping my wedding. The audacity was so pure it was almost impressive. On the morning of the gala, my phone rang. It was Rosie. Scarlett, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Mom told me you left brunch early. Look, I'm sorry I yelled. It's just the pressure of being in the public eye, you know? It's hard. I'm sure it is, I said, typing away on my laptop. I was finalizing the slides for the presentation. Mark really likes you, she lied. He thinks you're smart. We were thinking, maybe we could bring you on as a consultant for the new development. R&R is expanding. We could pay you a retainer. I stopped typing. It was a bribe. A clumsy, desperate bribe. You want to pay me? I asked. With what money, Rosie? The project money, she said quickly. Look, just don't mention the R&R thing tonight, okay? Dad is really stressed. If this gala goes well, the trust gets a massive grant from the state, like $2 million. Imagine what we could do with that. Imagine, I echoed, $2 million. Exactly, so we're cool. You're going to be a good sister. I'm going to be the sister you deserve, I said. Good, she said, missing the subtext entirely. Oh, and wear something subdued. I'm wearing gold. I don't want to clash. I hung up. The scale of the fraud was about to explode. If they got that state grant, they would steal half of it. I wasn't just exposing a past crime anymore, I was preventing a future one. At 6:00 p.m., I put on my dress. I hadn't listened to Patricia or Rosie. I wasn't wearing cream or something subdued. I wore a structured emerald green gown that looked like armor. It was sharp, professional, and commanded attention. David stood in the doorway, adjusting his tie. He looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. Are you sure you want to do this, Scarlett? Once you play that video, there is no going back. This is the nuclear option. I walked over to him and fixed his collar. They skipped our wedding to buy a purse with stolen money, David. They threatened to destroy my career if I spoke up. They are about to steal $2 million from the state. I picked up my clutch, which held a USB drive as a backup, just in case. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said, though a part of me knew that was a lie. I'm doing this because someone has to stop them, and apparently I'm the only one who isn't on their payroll. We drove to the country club in silence. The parking lot was full of luxury cars. Valets were running back and forth. The air smelled of expensive perfume and impending disaster. As we walked into the ballroom, the scene was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral centerpieces, a 10-piece band playing jazz. Robert and Patricia were receiving guests at the entrance, looking like royalty. Patricia was in a silver gown, Robert in a tuxedo. Rosie was standing slightly behind them, shimmering in gold, holding court with a group of wealthy donors. When Patricia saw me, her smile faltered for a microsecond before snapping back into place. She leaned in as I approached. You look intense, she whispered. Aired, eyeing my green dress. Remember what we discussed. Happy family, united front. Happy anniversary, Mom, I said, smiling a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I have a special surprise for you later. Oh, the video montage, she clapped her hands together. Chloe told me, that's very sweet of you, Scarlett, finally doing your part. Yes, I said, I'm finally doing my part. I walked past her, into the belly of the beast. I found Chloe near the sound booth. Is it loaded? I asked. All set, Chloe said, giving me a thumbs up. It's cued for 8:00 p.m., right before your dad's acceptance speech. I haven't watched it yet, wanted to be surprised, but the file size was huge. Must be a lot of memories. You have no idea, I said. I took my seat at the family table, next to an empty chair reserved for Rosie, who was too busy social climbing to sit down. I watched the room fill up. The mayor was here. The city council. The board of directors for the trust. At 7:55 p.m., Robert took the stage. The room quieted down. He adjusted the microphone, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice booming. 35 years ago, I married the love of my life, and together we dedicated our lives to this community, to this family. He gestured to our table. People applauded. Patricia dabbed at a fake tear. Tonight, Robert continued, we celebrate not just our marriage, but the legacy we are building, the integrity we bring to this trust. I checked my watch, 7:59 p.m. But before I continue, Robert said, smiling benevolently at me, my daughter Scarlett has prepared a special tribute, a look back at our journey. He gestured to the massive projection screen behind him. The lights dimmed. The room went silent. Robert stepped aside, looking smug. He expected baby photos. He expected wedding clips. He expected propaganda. I took a sip of water. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. The screen flickered to life. The screen behind my father didn't dissolve into a montage of wedding photos or charitable ribbon cuttings. Instead, a stark, high-contrast title card appeared in absolute silence. The Community Trust, a financial review. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Robert turned around, his smile freezing. He laughed nervously into the microphone. "Ah, it seems we have a technical glitch. Perhaps the wrong file." Then the first slide transitioned. It was a split screen. On the left, Community Trust Disbursement, $4,500. Purpose, Strategic Planning. On the right, Rosie's Instagram story, dated the same day. Caption, New Laubautins, blessed. Price tag visible on the box, $1,295. The room went deadly quiet. The kind of silence where you can hear the ice melting in the glasses. The slide changed. Left, disbursement to R&R Consulting, $8,200. Purpose, logistics. Right, flight manifesto and hotel booking for Cabo San Lucas. Guest name, Rosie. Date, concurrent. "Turn it off," Robert barked, his benevolent mask slipping instantly. He waved frantically at the sound booth. "Chloe, cut the feed, now." But Chloe wasn't at the booth. I saw her walking toward the exit, her job done. The tech inside the booth, confused and likely terrified by the tone of the yelling, fumbled with the controls, but the presentation was on an autoloop I had locked. The slides kept coming, faster now, a relentless drumbeat of evidence. Invoice 512, Client Entertainment Le Jardin, $850, date October 14th. Note, wedding night celebration. A collective gasp went up from the table where my relatives were sitting. They knew the date. They knew exactly where my parents were supposed to be that night. "This is slander," Patricia shrieked, standing up. Her silver dress caught the light, making her look like a jagged knife. "Scarlett, you ungrateful little witch, stop this." I stood up slowly. I didn't need a microphone. The acoustics of the ballroom were excellent, and the silence of the crowd was absolute. "It's not slander if it's in the ledger, Mother," I said, my voice carrying clearly. "And it's certainly not slander if the consulting firm you've been paying for 3 years is registered to a P.O. box that Rosie owns." All eyes turned to Rosie. She was frozen in her chair, her face a mask of pale terror. The golden girl, the sun of our solar system, was suddenly looking very small. I didn't," Rosie stammered, looking at the screen where her signature was blown up on a digital invoice. Mark, the developer, slowly pushed his chair back. He stood up, unhooked Rosie's hand from his arm as if she were contagious, and walked away from the table without a word. "Robert, what is this?" The mayor was standing now. He was a large man with a low tolerance for embarrassment. "Is that the grant money? Is that the city's money?" Robert was sweating profusely, his face a mottled red. He grabbed the microphone stand, his knuckles white. "This is a fabrication, my dot. She is mentally unwell. She is jealous of her sister. This is a hack, a deep fake." "It's not a fake, Dad," I said, walking toward the stage. I held up the USB drive in my hand. "I have the metadata. I have the bank transfer numbers. I have the emails where you instructed me to clean up the books last year. I didn't clean them. I copied them." I stopped at the edge of the stage and looked at the crowd. R&R Consulting stands for Rosie and Robert. They have stolen over $250,000 from this charity to fund my sister's lifestyle and my parents' image. While the youth center roof was collapsing, Rosie was driving a Range Rover paid for by your donations. The crowd erupted. People were standing, shouting, pulling out phones to record. Robert looked at the chaos, then he looked at Rosie. In that moment, I saw the survival instinct kick in. The same instinct that made him skip my wedding to save face. He realized the ship was sinking, and he needed ballast to throw overboard. "It was her," Robert shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking. He pointed a shaking finger at Rosie. "She did it. She set up the company, she tricked us. Patricia and I, we just signed what she gave us. We're elderly, we didn't know." The room gasped. Rosie's head snapped up. She looked at her father, her hero, her financier, her protector, with an expression of absolute shattering betrayal. "What?" she whispered. "She has a gambling problem," Patricia added, jumping on the lifeboat with her husband. "We tried to help her manage her finances, but she must have embezzled the funds. We are victims here." I watched Rosie. I watched the moment her world ended. She had spent her entire life believing she was the favorite, the chosen one. She believed they loved her more. But in the end, they only loved the reflection of themselves she provided. When the mirror cracked, they were ready to sweep up the shards and throw them in the trash. Rosie stood up. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were dry. She looked at Mark's empty chair. She looked at the crowd filming her. And then she looked at Robert and Patricia. You told me it was a tax loop," Rosie screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. "You told me R&R was legal. You made me sign the incorporation papers because you said you couldn't have it in your names because of the board." "Liar," Robert bellowed. "I have the texts," Rosie shrieked, fumbling for her clutch. She ripped her phone out. "I have the texts from you, Dad. Sign this so we can pay for the car. Sign this so we can pay the credit card. You told me it was your money." She ran toward me, not to attack me, but to the only person in the room who wasn't looking at her with disgust. "Scarlett," she sobbed, holding the phone out to me like an offering. "I didn't know it was stolen. They said it was a bonus. They said they were managing the fund." I took the phone. I looked at the screen. There it was. A text from Robert, "Just sign the invoice, honey. We need to move the funds before the quarter ends. It's just paperwork." I looked up at my parents on the stage. They were small, they were terrified, and they were utterly alone. "Thank you, Rosie," I said quietly. "This helps." I turned to the back of the room, where two uniformed officers, hired for security but now very interested in the proceedings, were making their way to the front. "Officers," I said, handing them Rosie's phone and my USB drive. "I think you have everything you need." The fallout was not swift. It was a slow, grinding disintegration that dominated the local news cycle for months. Robert and Patricia were escorted out of the gala in handcuffs. The image of my father, still in his tuxedo, being guided into the back of a police cruiser, was splashed across the front page of the city paper the next morning. The headline read, "Charity Charade, the high cost of high society." Because of the amount of money involved, and the fact that some of it came from state grants, the charges were severe: embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. I didn't attend the arraignment. I didn't need to. I had given my statement to the district attorney, handed over Marcus's forensic report, and then stepped back. The reconciliation with the truth was brutal for everyone, but mostly for Rosie. 2 weeks after the gala, I went to see her. She wasn't in jail. Her lawyer had cut a deal. In exchange for her testimony against Robert and Patricia, and because she could prove she had been manipulated into believing the funds were legitimate family assets, she pleaded down to a lesser charge. She avoided prison time, but she was sentenced to 5 years of probation and thousands of hours of community service. She was staying in a small, studio apartment on the edge of town. The Range Rover was gone, seized by the Asset Forfeiture Unit. The designer clothes had been sold on eBay to pay her legal fees. When she opened the door, she looked different. The blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, the roots showing. She wore no makeup. She looked 10 years older, and for the first time, she looked like a real person. "Scarlett," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "She didn't invite me in. Come to gloat." No, I said, holding out a coffee cup from her favorite cafe. I came to see if you were okay. She looked at the coffee, then at me. Her lip trembled and she stepped back to let me in. The apartment was sparse. A futon, a table, a stack of boxes. It was a far cry from the life she had been gifted, but it was the first life that was actually hers. They really threw me to the wolves, didn't they? She asked, sitting on the futon and staring into the steam of the coffee. In front of everyone, Dad didn't even hesitate. They love themselves more than anyone, Rosie, I said, sitting on the single folding chair. They always have. You were just the trophy, I was the spare. When the trophy got tarnished, they tried to toss it. Rosie took a sip of the coffee. I hated you, you know. For years, I thought you were jealous of me because I was special. She laughed, a dry, hollow sound. I was a pet, a poodle they dressed up. You were the only one who was actually free. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. I'm sorry, Scarlett. I'm sorry about the wedding. I'm sorry I let them use me to hurt you. I was so afraid of losing their approval that I became a monster. I looked at her. I saw the sister I had played with in the backyard before the world told us we were rivals. I saw the damage my parents had done, not just to the bank accounts, but to her soul. I forgive you, Rosie, I said softly, but I can't fix this for you. You have to do the work now. I know, she nodded, wiping her eyes. I got a job, a real one, receptionist at a dental office. It pays almost nothing, but I keep the money, it's mine. That's a start, I said. We talked for an hour. It wasn't warm and it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. When I left, we didn't hug, but the air between us was clear for the first time in decades. Robert and Patricia weren't so lucky. They refused to plead guilty, convinced their status would save them. The trial was a circus. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict them on all counts. They were sentenced to 8 years in minimum security, and the court ordered full restitution. To pay back the trust, the estate was seized. The colonial house, the cars, the jewelry, the art, everything was auctioned off. On the day the house was sold, David and I drove by. The sold sign was slapped crookedly on the for sale post. The manicured hedges were starting to look overgrown. David reached over and took my hand. How do you feel? I looked at the house. I remembered the empty front row at my wedding. I remembered the phone call where my father told me to lower my voice. I remembered the look on Rosie's face when she realized she was disposable. I feel light, I said. I feel like the check finally cleared. We drove away, leaving the empty shell of the perfect family behind us. The community trust recovered. With the money from the auction, they fixed the roof of the youth center. They even expanded the food bank. I continued my work in crisis management, but I made a rule. I only helped people who were willing to tell the truth. My parents wanted a legacy. They wanted to be remembered as pillars of the community. And in a way, they got their wish. They became a cautionary tale, a story told in whispers at country club dinners, a reminder that the shinier the apple, the more likely it is to be rotten at the core. As for me, I didn't need a legacy. I had David. I had my career. And for the first time in my life, I had the truth, and that was more than enough.